through its modern day expression, which is ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He's the author of 30 books that explain the relevance of Vedic wisdom. Texts include the Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana. He's the author of world's only daily blog on Bhagavad Gita called GitaDaily.com, where he has written some 5,000 articles on the Gita. He is invited speaker at TEDx, World Peace Conference, UNESCO, Intel, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, MIT, and Cambridge. Prabhuji gives around 400 talks across 100 cities in 4 continents every year. Um, we are extremely, extremely fortunate to get his association today. And his introduction is just speaking of all the work he's doing. So thank you so much, Prabhuji for joining the call. And we welcome you to today's call. You can, whenever you're ready, please start. And Nikunjaras Prabhu, can you please start the recording?
Yes, it started, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hari
Thank you
Bol.
very much.
Since
I'm
Prabhuji
happy to
joined
be
first time,
here with all of you today.
let us welcome Prabhuji in our traditional way by chanting 3 times Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Yeah, welcome, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Dandot Pranam.
And happy to hear all. Can you all of you hear me clearly?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatharine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. My dear Lord, please guide us all so that we can understand your words of wisdom and know how they can be applied in our lives so that we can become better and come closer to you. Hare Krishna. So, today, am I audible here? So, we are
Yes,
discussing today the...
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, perfect. And screen sharing is happening. So, I'll be using the whiteboard, the tablet to write and draw certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So let's begin by looking at the verse 8 to 5. The elephant Gajendra's crisis. Siddhacharana Gandharvair Vidyadhar Mahoragai Kinnarair Apsarobhishcha Kridadbhir Jushtakandaraha. Siddha by the inhabitants of Siddha Loka. Charana, the inhabitants of Charan Loka. Gandharvai, the inhabitants of Gandharva Loka. Vidyadhara, the inhabitants of Vidyadhar Loka. Maha Uragai, the inhabitants of the serpent Loka. Kinnarai, the Kinnaras. Apsarobhi, the Apsaras. Cha and Kridadbhi, who were engaged in sporting. Jushta, enjoyed. Kandaraha, the caves. The inhabitants of the higher planets, the Siddhas, Charanas, Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, serpents, Kinnaras, Apsaras, go to that mountain to sport. As all the caves of the mountain are full of these denizens of the heavenly planets. Purport, as ordinary men may play in the salty ocean, the inhabitants of the higher planetary systems go to the ocean of milk. They float in the ocean of milk and also enjoy various sports within the caves of Trikuta mountain. So here, let's look at what is happening in the Srimad Bhagavatam and try to understand how we can understand it better. So if we look at what is going on, generally when I give a class, I try to use a framework that I call as CHIT. Now try to understand the context of what is going on, then look at the insight of the implication. What does it mean for us? What does it imply for us? And then what is the takeaway? How can we apply in our life from this? So another way to understand, so context is we focus more on the verse and the text within the verse and the chapter and the book. That's what we try to understand. And then implication is we try to more look at the universal principle over there. And then takeaway is the application for us. So it is more like a relevant application for us. What can we take away from this? So this is a framework that we can use for approaching anything in scripture. Chit also means consciousness. So how to approach scripture in a way that our consciousness can expand and ultimately expand toward becoming Krishna conscious. So right now, our consciousness is small, and the spiritual journey is about making our consciousness large so that our consciousness becomes filled with Krishna. Krishna is the largest being. And when we have Krishna, our consciousness becomes filled with Krishna, our consciousness also becomes expanded. So ultimately, every shloka that we approach, every spiritual teaching that we approach, now this is the journey that we want to go. Now each shloka that we approach might be just one step along this journey. It will take a little bit of our consciousness may also expand by that. And that is also good. So if a little bit of our consciousness expands. So from this perspective, now let's look at the context. If we consider, this is the starting of the 8th canto, and this is the first pastime, major pastime described in the 8th canto. We're in the 2nd chapter right now. So chapters 2, 3, and 4. It describes, if we go backward over here, you will see that chapters 2, 3, and 4. Right now we are describing the Gajendra's crisis, and then his prayers of surrender, and ultimately his liberation, his return to the spiritual world. These 3 chapters has a beautiful arc that way. So the first chapter is describing how he was materially happy. He's in a very wonderful situation, but from there he went to from material happiness, almost not just pain or material distress, he went to a state of material hopelessness. These two are described in the first chapter. From that position of material hopelessness, then he goes to a spiritual surrender. And from spiritual surrender, then he will get to spiritual liberation. So in the word liberation or moksha or mukti is very common in the Vedic tradition, especially the Upanishads. And in the Bhakti tradition, it refers to ultimately not the impersonal liberation, but the loving union with God in his abode. So this is the journey that is going to be described over here. And right now, in the start of this chapter, so if we consider Second chapter, first, it describes how he is materially happy. And then he will become how he becomes materially hopeless. So right now, how he is materially happy is being described. And while how he is materially happy is being described, it is, so generally when we talk about material happiness, it depends on several factors. Material happiness can come from the place we are in. It can come from the people we are with. It can come from the activity we are doing. It can come from the mood we have at that point, or attitude or frame of mind that we have. So there are many factors which determine. So in one sense, if we consider that how does material happiness come? For that matter, any kind of happiness, how does it come? We can say the soul is here. Now the soul is situated in the mind. The soul is a subtle body. The soul is situated in the gross body. And then the soul is situated in a social circle among some people. And the soul is situated in the environmental circle. Soul is situated in a particular environment. So if we consider each of these, the soul, the mind, the body, the people, and the place. Those of you some of you may notice that this is associated with the body and the mind are associated with the Adhyatmik. The people are associated with Adi Bhautik. The places are associated with the Adi Daivik. So generally, if we consider everything about happiness, if we somebody goes to a hill station or somebody goes to a beautiful place, say in India, somebody might go to Goa or Nainital or Darjeeling. In America, somebody might go to Niagara Falls. Somebody might go to certain places. In America, beautiful, some lakes, some deserts, some forests, some mountains. So the place, going to a particular place, some places are beautiful, some places are architectural marvels. But the place can give us happiness. Then the people whom we are going with. Now, when either the people could refer to the people whom we are going with or people to whom we are going. So when, say, tourists come to India, often we take spiritual tourists on a spiritual tour of India. The place is important. They would like to go and see the Taj Mahal. They might want to go see Jaipur. They might, if they're more devotional inclined, they may also want to see Vrindavan. So they place, but then who are the kind of people either who are guiding them or whom they are interacting with over there? Somebody might go to Radha Kund, or somebody might go to Jagannath Puri. And if they meet people over there who are, say, for whatever reason, the religious representatives of those places are sometimes very pushy and aggressive in demanding money, it can create a very unpleasant experience. So the people around us, they matter a lot for the kind of experience that we have. And then, of course, sometimes if you go to a particular place, if our health is not good, you travel to a new place because of the food, we get dysentery or whatever, that can be very unpleasant. Or if somebody has a very critical attitude, they didn't want to go to India, but maybe somebody pushed them to go and they have come. So even if they're going to a very beautiful place, they may not appreciate the beauty. On the other hand, somebody that is spiritually curious and eager, I've read so much about India, I've heard about India, I want to explore it. I see many tourists, people who have that, what they call as wanderer bug or travel lust, they call it. Now they say that people who love to travel, now they just love exploring new people and new places so much that even though there are physical inconveniences, they fall sick, the weather is too hot, the logistics don't work, they don't get irritated. So the idea is that material happiness depends on many of these factors. And why are we discussing all this? Here, the place is being described and it is such a fantastic place that it can almost seem to be like fantasy. That fantasy is something which is imaginary, which is unreal. Fantastic is wonderful. So now some people can get fixated on this itself. Oh, are all these kind of beings actually existing? Are all these so many different specific names are given over here? The Charanas, the Siddhas, the Apsaras. Who has seen all these people? And there is one scholar of religion, he said that while the mythological imagination is there in every religious tradition, it is only in the Hindu tradition that the mythological imagination has run riot. That they have not just imagined one god, imagine millions of gods. They are not just imagined one particular abode like heaven or something. They've imagined dozens of other planets, hundreds of millions of universes, and even an unlimited number of spiritual worlds. So the idea is that all this can seem, it's a fair point, if we consider that now it's not imagination, but from their perspective, it's mythological imagination run riot. In other traditions, okay, there is one god, and then there is one particular abode where God lives. Of course, never that simple. In the Christian tradition, there are angels and there are demons and there are devils, and there are ghosts which need to be exorcised. So there is a whole range of that is there everywhere also. But certainly the idea of so many gods being there is not there. But independent of whether it's the Indian tradition or not, and any sacred text that we look at, there will be much that will seem unbelievable to the mind today. So now for those of us who are regularly studying these texts, this may not even strike us as too objectionable. Yeah, just describing this world. Why? Because what has happened? We all live within a particular worldview. We all live within a particular worldview. So, for example, this is the scriptural worldview. Shastra Chakshu or Jnana Chakshu. Basically, we live within a scriptural worldview. And most people live within a different worldview. Say, for example, their worldview would be a modern worldview. Now, what happens is that when two people are having two different worldviews, then communication itself can become very difficult. Because let's try to explore the point of worldview over here. So now I have moved in the analysis. The context I gave, what is the context? The how enjoyable this place is. That is what is being talked about over here. So that's why the specifics of the place were given. And Prabhupada focuses on that particular point when he says that just as we play and sport here, similarly, there are places where people are sporting in the higher abode. So in the CHIT acronym, I have moved toward the implication now. So what is the implication? Implication is all this can seem so fantastic as to seem like fantasy. And how do we deal with that? So let's try to understand first the concept of a worldview and how it shapes our view. Our worldview is often invisible, yet while being invisible, or we may not be aware of so much of our worldview, but it shapes our every view. Everything that we see is shaped by our worldview. And that's why understanding what someone's worldview is before we can communicate with them is important. So, for example, if somebody is, say, very money minded, somebody is very not just materialistic. Materialistic could mean that they want lots of material good, they want material fame, but materialistic specifically in terms of money minded, we might say we might use the word greedy for them. Hmm? Hmm. So then for them, if that is the base of their worldview, then everything they will see in terms of monetary value. Now, seeing comes into monetary value, is it important? Well, yes. When somebody comes to a temple, if it's a grand temple that we see, then we will be aware, oh, whichever religious group or whichever community build this temple, they must have a lot of money. Otherwise, they would not be able to build such a big temple. But for most people, yeah, that would be one factor. What we might look as the grandness of the temple, the artistry of the temple, how the spiritual ambience is created by its artistry and architecture. And you might focus on trying to understand if it's our own tradition, then okay, who are the people who are behind this and how are they depicted various things? If they are from a different tradition, you want to know, okay, what are their beliefs? How do they worship? What do they worship? So a looking at the monetary value is important, but if all that is all that we are looking at, then we'll miss out on so many things in our view. Mm. So the idea is that our worldview, whatever it may be, it shapes our every view. So especially when we go deep into scripture. Now, if we start communicating scripture with our children, now what happens? The children, if you look at a children's journey, and we could say a child's worldview journey. I hope the concept of worldview is clear, that it is the basic foundational lens with which we view everything. So when our children are small, say till the age of say 10 or 12, as you call it, preteens, 10, then they just more or less adopt the parents' worldview. Hmm? Now, of course, if the I'll not get into the complexity where the parents don't have a shared worldview, where say the father is materialistic and the mother is a devotee, or the mother is religious and the father is not. Let's assume that the parents have more or less a shared worldview. So the child adopts that particular worldview. Now, of course, at this time also the child is going to school, and school they are learning certain things. But it is the parents' influences much more, at least the first 5-6 years. But now, after this onward, somewhere from 10 prominently, now these ages are a bit arbitrary, but the specifics may not vary. So, say maybe up to 20, 22, 25, something like that, 22, between 20 to 25, let's put it here, that there's the education that shapes their worldview. That is, there are peers that shape their worldview. And there is the broader culture. The peers can be said to be associated with the culture. The peers can also be said to be associated with education. That means just the kind of kids that they hang out with. So now, this is where, if these two worldviews don't match, then this is where what is psychology called as a cognitive dissonance. Like resonance means two sounds reinforce each other. Dissonance means the two sounds just go completely opposite to each other. And when cognitive dissonance happens, well, then it's very difficult to process it. So, for example, if somebody grows up in bhakti, and if they do not have a proper understanding of how science and scripture interact, they may be told by some teachers or by somebody that say the whole theory of evolution is wrong, and then they go to school and they find that evolution is not just accepted, evolution is embedded in almost every area of science nowadays. And then, so is this right? Is this wrong? How do I deal with this? So this is a much deeper pain than simply the pain of desires. When somebody hits teenagers, it hits teens, the hormones start becoming active, and as puberty starts coming closer, certain desires start coming in biologically, and those may pull them to go away from what the values and the principle that they have learned from their tradition. And that pull has to be fought against, and that's difficult, but that can be done. What is much more difficult is, for at least some people, those who are more rationally or intellectually inclined, is this. So here I'm giving an example that how does this work? What is happening is that the worldview that we have shapes our view. And so you could say they grew up in a school, they grew up with their parents, they get more like a faith-centered worldview. Faith-centered worldview means a faith-centric worldview. So, but as they go in education, they often get a more reason-centered worldview. Is this logical? Does this make sense? And when it doesn't make sense, they struggle to somehow make sense of it. It's almost like there are two parts inside them, and the two parts just can't get along with each other. I saw one picture nowadays, it was more like a cartoon image, where an Indian boy is in America, and his American friend is asking him, "Why do you people worship so many gods?" And this Indian boy thinks, and he says, "We like to keep backups." We like to keep backups. So the idea over here is that we don't really learn, uh, if we don't learn how to answer questions, then we will try to come up with our own answers. And that's how everybody tries to resolve this cognitive dissonance. In religious psychology, one common question that is asked for, say, children who grow up in a particular tradition and they adopt that tradition. So in Judaism, these studies have been done a lot. Christianity also has been done it. In Islam and Hinduism, they have not been done so much. It is that, how does your faith, how is your, if children who grow up and they become young adults or adults, and they have adopted that faith, you ask them, how is your faith similar to and different from the faith of your parents? So sometimes the answers are fascinating over here. Like, say, many of us we may want our children or our grandchildren to become devotees, and we may do everything that we can for that purpose, but we may find that they, even when they adopt bhakti, they may not adopt bhakti the way we adopted it. For example, they may be interested in kirtan, but they may not be interested in japa so much. Or they may they may be interested in kirtan, they may be interested in japa also, but maybe the gender interactions between boys and girls will be much more fluid than how they were much more structured and rigid in the past. So every generation will find its way to harmonize what it has got from the tradition and what it is getting from the culture. So this understanding that our worldview is affecting others, and if their worldview is not similar, then that before communication can happen, we need to find out what are the similarities between their worldview and our worldview. And so going back to this earlier point, let's say if this is a scriptural worldview and this is a more modern worldview. So now if this is a scriptural worldview, and a more modern worldview. So we need to be able to understand which is the intersection between the two of them. And then we need to focus on this area for communication, for establishing some basis for sharing what it is that we are teaching. So I'll give 2 or 3 examples of this. And now, so I am moving on to the takeaway now from here, that the implication was that if people have different worldviews and communication has to happen, then we have to find the overlapping area between the two worldviews. And over time, that 2 things can happen by this. So let's move to the takeaway. Now, if we focus on this area of communication, 2 things can happen. One is that we may gradually find that this area itself increases. There is greater and greater overlap. That person may still have that worldview. We may still have our old worldview, but the overlap may increase. That could be one way this trajectory can grow. Another way the trajectory can grow is that can we, is there any problem, or can you put everyone on mute otherwise?
Yes, Prabhuji, sorry about that.
So the other thing that can happen is that gradually that person from there may come to adopt the worldview here. So now both of these are success. So here we'll see the person takes a journey, and by taking that journey comes to the worldview over here. So this is basically where you could say this, here a person become, if you consider it as a scripture, here a person becomes a scripture appreciator. Appreciator is, hey, there is something of value in scripture. Here a scripture person becomes a scriptural follower. Follower means they accept the, so appreciator means we see some value in scripture. Follower means we see scripture as not just some value, but we see scripture as a source of authority. And this will happen gradually. So if we move forward from here to understand this further, let's look at some examples of how Srila Prabhupada adopted this particular point also. When Prabhupada was in Los Angeles, some devotees from Hawaii, they came to meet him and they said, Prabhupada, when we talk with the scholars and when we tell them, so this is when we tell them about, we're talking about the Bhagvatam, and there are people who are scholars, academic scholars. He says, if we tell them that, say, Maharaj Ugrasen, who was the ruler of Dwarka, had some extraordinary number of bodyguards, which ran into some fantastic figure. So they start laughing at us. And they say, at where were their quarters? Where they were their washrooms? How did they live in a place like Dwarka? Now, Prabhupada could have said that Krishna can maintain the entire world on the tip of a needle. Prabhupada could have emphasized the inconceivable power of Krishna. So we could just make it astronomical. By astronomical, I'm not using about astronomy, but some huge astronomical figures are there. And the academic view, they may seem as absurd. So now how do these reconcile that? What was Prabhupada's reply? His reply was surprisingly non-confrontational and pragmatic. Prabhupada said, Among all thousands of verses in the Bhagavatam, was that the only thing that you found to speak to the scholars? If say we are going to meet a person for the first time or the only time, and is that what we want to tell them at that time? Oh, this king had so many bodyguards. It's not the important message of the Bhagavatam. So when Prabhupada was asked by a couple of scholars about, if your message is to be summarized very briefly, what would you use? So Prabhupada, of course, different times he use different things, but quite often he said 1.2.9 and 10. He says, Dharmasyapavargasya narthortha kalpate. नाथस्य धर्मैकान्तस्य कामो लाभाय हि स्मृता कामस्य नेन्द्रिय प्रीति लाभो जीवेत यावता जीवस्य तत्व जिज्ञासा अर्थो यश्च कर्मभिः. So the idea is, in these verses, the focus is life is meant for spiritual cultivation. Life is not meant for material gratification. Now, this is a message that anybody can relate with. Now, not everybody can accept it, but everybody can relate with it. Because sooner or later, everybody will start experiencing that, okay, I have sought certain things in my life. There are many I haven't achieved. There are a few I have achieved. But even those which I have achieved have not really led me to happiness. So is there some other way to happiness that I can pursue? And that's how things move forward. So if you consider the takeaway for us is, like Prabhupada also gives a definition of realization. On Guru Purnima, I give a class on this topic about how every acharya in our tradition has actually adopted this principle. Srila Prabhupada says when we are going to teach, if this is the message of scripture that is coming from the past, and this is the interests of the audience. So these are like the overlapping diagrams, the overlapping shapes. So he says that realization means to speak the message of scripture in a way that is interesting for the audience. So in one sense, as speakers, as teachers, as practitioners, we could say we are over here, we are inside the tradition. But from there, we need to be able to come at least conceptually to be temporarily in this circle, to understand what are the interests of the audience. So once we understand the interests we don't want to reside over there, but we need to go over there, understand, and then come back over here. So this is our home. But just like when we are going to do outreach, if we are only going to be in our homes, if we don't go out to distribute books, you don't go out to call people. If you are in the temple also, if you're staying, we stay in our own room. So many visitors will come to our temple, but we will not be able to reach out to them. Just as outreach. Outreach means it requires that we come out of our home. Now, nowadays with digital outreach, we can go out of our home, even digitally also. But physically or digitally, we do have to go out of our home. So similarly, we may have to conceptually, intellectually, worldview-wise come out of our home. Instead of just saying that, oh, anybody doesn't accept scripture is in Maya. No. Okay, what is this person thinking? Why are they thinking like that? Within their thinking, how can I present scriptural wisdom in a way that they can make sense out of it? Srila Prabhupada, so going out of our home, it could be physical home, it can also be our intellectual home, our worldview home. So if we have too much of a dismissive attitude, all these people are simply in Maya. Okay, they are in Maya, but they have their own reasoning why they are having that kind of conception. So when we do this, we'll be able to reach out to people much more effectively. I'll give 2 examples of this and then end the talk. when Srila Prabhupada was talking with the BI devotees. BI is the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and there are scientists or devotees who are interested in science. So at that time, he says that we should, when he's discussing with them about, say, the existence of God or the existence of soul, and devotees start quoting shlokas. Prabhupada said, don't quote scripture here. He said, our message, we should be able to present the message not just based on scripture, by quoting scripture where required, we should be able to quote it, explain it based on logic without needing to refer to scripture. So it depends on the kind of audience that we are trying to reach out to. Now, if we are reaching out to a traditional audience who has already accepted scriptural authority, then quoting scripture will actually reassure them that, oh, what you're saying is based on scripture. So in the Bhagavatam, it is said, going back to this particular point, that it is yatha shruti and yatha mati. Yatha shruti is what I have heard from scripture. Yatha mati is what I have understood according to the worldview that I came from, according to the worldview that I'm trying to reach. So whenever yatha mati or yatha aditi, it is said. This phrase comes multiple times. So this point which Prabhupada mentions about realization, there's a scriptural basis for that. Shruti is what we get from the tradition. Mati or Dhiti is what we get by observing the world around us. To the same point, we should be able to convey according to scripture to those who accept scriptural authority. For those who do not accept scriptural authority, then for them we need to be able to explain things rationally using logic. So for example, if we choose not to eat meat, then if our children are going to school and say others are eating meat over there, and some student asks, why don't you eat meat? Now we can say that in the Bhagavatam it is said that anybody who breaks the 4 regulative principles, that person will go to hell, and they will be boiled in just as the animals are fried in frying pans of oil, they will be fried in oil, and they'll suffer terribly. And if you eat meat, you'll go to hell. They should tell that. What is most people say? You go to hell right now. I don't want anything to talk with you. You are just a religious nut. You are a irrational person. So they have not accepted scripture. They have not accepted the idea of hell. Even if they have accepted scripture and they accepted the idea of hell, they may be from a Christian tradition where meat eating is not talked about in such negative terms over there. So then what happens is we need to talk based on logic. Logic means what? That there are many reasons. I have an article on my the spiritual scientist website, where I talk about how your food can help the world. So how every bite that we eat, vegetarian food, is better for our health. It is better for our environment. Why is it better for our health? Because it is actually human body is the alimentary canal and everything is much more suitable, much more similar to the vegetarian alimentary canal, the whole digestive system, than animal digestive, than the non-vegetarian's carnivorous digestive system. Environment is because the amount of land that is used to grow fodder for livestock, if we use it to grow food for human beings, so many more humans can be fed than livestock. Livestock is where the animals are subjected to so much cruelty. And there are documentaries like Meat Your Meat or whatever. They show how much subjected to pain they are. There's something which is universal, there's something common. They also have concern about this. And overall, we can actually remove much poverty from the world if we shift to more of a vegetarian diet. And this is not just me saying it. The Food and Agriculture Organization has said this. Many secularly respected organizations have also said it. So when we explain it in this way, then it becomes relatively easier for people to understand. So the idea is, we may have a scriptural explanation for this, but for the same point, is there a logical explanation? So we start with the logical explanation, and then we can say, yeah, this is why I do it. At the same time, this is also talked about in my scriptures. I base this on this particular scripture, but the specific reason we give in the beginning need not be the reason that comes from scripture. It may be a reason that comes from how people understand it. Now, if we consider we wear tilak. Now, for tilak, we can give a very devotional reason, that this is, if you're talking with insiders, those who have accepted scriptural authority, we can easily, or those who are ready to become insiders, we say that this is Krishna's lotus feet and it's Tulsi. Now, if you consider, and Tulsi is his consort, and this is the leaf is at the foot of the Lord. So now the fact is that this becomes too much for people to understand, and then it also leads to gender related questions. Okay, why is the male above? Why is the female below? And why is the female at the feet of the male? This seems to be like a very gendered hierarchy, which can actually just trigger people unnecessarily. First of all, they can't understand it. Even if they understand it, they may not be able to relate with it. It will lead to questions. So for new people, if somebody asks about tilak, I say that simply that we understand in our tradition that our existence is a gift of divinity and of nature. So this particular symbol, it represents divinity, and this particular symbol, it represents nature. So now if once you go into specifics, we can talk about how there is a synergy between divinity and nature. And the nature itself, we don't have to say that nature is female and divinity is male, because then again, yes, why is divinity only male? Why can't divinity not be female? So basically, there may be a specific explanation, and there may be a universal explanation. Universal means that something which can be understood by people who have not yet accepted the specific assumptions or specific scriptural teachings of the tradition. So to the extent we understand this and present accordingly, we will be able to reach out to more and more people. And Srila Prabhupada, in a simple purport, when he is saying, he could have gone into, okay, who are the Charanas, who are the Siddhas, who are these, who are that. He could have gone into an elaborate description of all that. But Prabhupada just very practically focuses on the principle that just as we play over here, they are playing over there. So focus on the commonality, and all that can seem far out. That's not the emphasis. The emphasis is on what is relatable, what is understandable. And that way each one of us can grow in our journey, in helping others, in our capacity to help others grow on their journey. So I'll summarize what I discussed today. Our theme was how to share spiritual, or more so scriptural wisdom. That was a broad theme I was talking about. And I used the acronym CHIT for that. So C was CIT. C was the context. So in the context, I discussed how this is describing a material turbulence, then spiritual. So there is material happiness for Gajendra. Then there's material hopelessness for Gajendra. And then from that hopelessness comes spiritual surrender. And then there is spiritual liberation. So this is the trajectory of this is a textual trajectory, the textual context, we can say. And within that material happiness, what is described is that how for each one of us, our happiness is determined by, if we consider the soul is there, the soul, the kind of attitude that a person has, the frame of mind, the kind of activity that they're doing at a physical level, the kind of people they are with, and the place that they are in. All that determines the happiness for us, even at a material level. soul, the frame of mind, the body, and sorry, the body's physical activity that we are doing. What are we doing at a particular place? Then the kind of people we are hanging out with, and the place we are at. So all these determine our material happiness, or in general our happiness. It doesn't have to be material also, to some extent. So then right now in the Bhagavatam, the place is described. So then we describe that the place, the implication of this is, and the place can seem, it can seem so fantastic that it can seem to be like fantasy. This just is unbelievable. There's no way some place like this can exist. So we discussed how our every view, whatever we see, that is shaped by our worldview. So now we may not be consciously aware of our worldview, but our worldview invisibly shapes our every view of the visible. And therefore, whenever there's to be outreach, what we need to understand is that I am inhabiting a particular worldview, the other person is inhabiting a different worldview. And this is our worldview, and this is the other's worldview. So understanding what is the worldview that they are having and finding out where is the intersection between the two, that is important. When this is done, what can happen is that the area of overlap may gradually increase, and this is where a person becomes at least an appreciator of scripture, or they may still be in that other worldview, but they'll at least become appreciator. Or what can happen with time is that they may even move from that worldview to adopt a more scriptural worldview. So ours could be a scriptural worldview. There could be a more modern or rational worldview. So I talked about our children, when they are evolving, how their worldview journey occurs. So for us, as a takeaway, we discussed how the principle of realization is that we need to be expert enough to look at what is the message of scripture and what is the audience interest. Interest refers to what is interesting or intelligible within their worldview. And we need to be able to present the message of scripture in such a way that it can interest them. That's why it's important that we at least be intellectually able to come out of our worldview. This is our home, but this is for outreach. We need to be able to come out of our worldview and go out to see how they are thinking, what they are thinking, and be able to communicate accordingly. So the same message of scripture, this could be our message, that could be taught based on scripture, but that can be taught also based on logic. Now, this can also, so I give example of how we may talk about meat eating, why we avoid eating meat, or I can give the example of how to explain about tilak. So even if it's not exactly logical, we are talking here about something which is more universal. So you can give a specific example and a specific explanation and universal explanation. The more universal the explanation, the more intelligible it will be for people. And that's how our outreach can expand. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Is there any question or comment?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much for this very, very illuminating class. I actually do not know the details about the tilak. Maybe this is not the forum for it, but maybe another time we can talk about it if the class time is over. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari
Hare
Bol.
Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you so much for this nectarine class. And so natural, so simply you explain how to explain about the tilak and how to the school going kids, how to explain about non-veg or vegetarian food, about that. And so thank you so much, Prabhuji. We really appreciate your time and coming on the call. And anybody has any question or comment, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances of the special Prabhupada. Thank you very much for the nice class, Prabhu. I had a question. Uh, like, um, my children grew up in Krishna consciousness, but as they went to college and in the high school, um, I mean, when you are explaining the class, I could understand their worldview seemed to be shaped by uh, the school and the college. And I grew up in India, so for me, I do not understand their worldview fully. At least a little bit, I do understand, Prabhu. But I see that at least for one of them, there is this dissonance, the cognitive dissonance that you were talking about in terms of how what we follow at home and what his friends or what the others do. They're still inclined, but at least as a parent, my expectations are different. I'm struggling with that. Uh, uh, any guidance on that, Prabhu?
Yeah, just talk with them, don't talk to them. Instead of immediately judging their actions as wrong, try to understand why, if they have some reason. Now, we may not consider the reason acceptable, but they have some reason. So at least try to understand them. See, if our children feel that that we are not even ready to understand them, or we are not even capable of understanding them, then there is a communication breakdown. So one of the problems in this is that on one side, as parents, we are expected to, it's our responsibility to pass on the values that have shaped our life, the values which we have received from our tradition, from our experience to our children. But at the same time, there's a particular time when it's not so much we passing on our values as they selecting which values they will accept. So at that time, instead of it becoming a transmission, it becomes more like a negotiation. Negotiation is going to happen in their mind. So if you consider initially, there's a parent and there is a child. So in the initial stage, it's a transmission of values. Okay, that is, if guests come to our life, you should respect them in this way, you should talk with them in this way. It's not that simple, but overall it's like that. But say after 10, 12 or something like that, and especially after 20, it becomes all the more. So here it starts becoming uh, a negotiation, or sometimes it may not even be, it just becomes like their selection of values. Ultimately, they select what values they are living according to. That's why, in general, I am not very much in favor of children getting initiated before they come to 18. Even if they're chanting 16 hours, even that's very enthusiastic. They have not yet developed their own thinking capacity to make their own choices. As parents may be very enthusiastic, oh, my child got initiated at the age of 12 or 13 or 14 or 15. No, it is ultimately their life. Krishna has given them free will. And they need to choose what they are choosing, and they need to choose it with their eyes and ears open, understanding what they're getting into or what they're committing to. So now, eventually, they will come to beyond 20, 25, they will come to an integration of values. The integration may take, it may take much more time, but that's where, okay, this is what I have learned from my parents, this is what I've learned from my tradition, this is what I have learned from my experience, and this is how I'll bring them together. So Now, that's why for children to also have peer groups is helpful. For children to have where there are other kids who are also spiritually inclined, spiritually interested. So it won't become 1-0 for them. That if there are kids who come together and they interact with each other, that also helps. So that way, it's a gradual process. But in general, during this phase, there has to be much more communication. If you see, rather than just instruction, there has to be communication. It's to and fro. Generally, the example of a guru and disciple or authority and subordinate, when we come from the Eastern world, it's very hierarchical. It's very vertical. Authority is on top, and the subordinate is below. Now here in the West, this is in the East much more. In the West, it is much more horizontal. There is some there's some amount of hierarchy is there, but it's much more horizontal. And if you see in the Vedic tradition also, this is not unprecedented. For example, we have Narada and we have Dhruva. So Narada tells Dhruva that you're such a small child, among children sometimes quarrels happen. Just go back home. Why are you leaving your home because it's a small thing? Now, Dhruva respects Narada. He says, well, the words you're saying are true, but they find no place in my heart. Because my heart has been insulted, has been wounded by the insulting words and the insulting actions of my stepmother and my father. So now Narada doesn't go on an ego trip and say, who do you think you are? I am the son of Brahma. I have been for more generations than living for more generations than number of years we have lived on this planet. So who do you think you're to question me? Narada doesn't do that. Narada gently, okay, if this doesn't work for you, then what works for you? Let's discuss that. And Narada gives him something that will work for him. So that way, I think communication has to happen. Okay. Thank you very much. Kantraj Srimad Bhagvatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.
Jai.
Gaur Premananda.
Thank you, Prabhu.
His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu ki jai.
Jai. Thank you,
so much.
Prabhuji, for such a
Yeah.
wonderful lecture
Thank you,
and
Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
so analytically explained everything. Hare
Please come
Krishna.
again.
Thank you, Prabhu.
On a regular basis. So please
Happy
come.
day of service.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol. Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very
Thank you
much.
for the class, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Hare
Great.
Krishna, Danda Pranam Prabhuji.
Dandavat. Thank you so much.
Dandavat pranam, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Pranam Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.